All right, guys. Now we're going to look at the word freedmen, and we're going to break it down of how in the media, the propaganda is they try to make you believe that freedmen were people that were stolen from Africa, people of African descent who were enslaved by so-called Native Americans, which we know a Native American is a person that came from Beringia, across the Bering Strait. Okay, so that's what they try to say. So that's the main narrative or the popular narrative that they teach, but it's the furthest thing from the truth, and we're going to break it all down. Now, okay, so I'm going to put links below so you guys can study up on this and save the links and stuff like that and go and share this with your family so that they can understand, you know, what a freedman is and what it is not.
Look, wait, let me play this about what this white lady said. Look, all right, so I was reading, I'm going through my notes and stuff like that. So I remember when I read, it talks about Indians who live apart from their tribes and who have citizenship in the United States, national citizenship, right? Man, look, listen to it. Just listen to this. Listen to what this lady said, right? Indian slaves, right?
Okay, they were slaves. We don't know that they were Indian.
It says it on the thing I just sent you.
It's talking about Choctaw Freedmen.
Then how come it does not have Choctaw Freedmen?
Okay, it does. Like in the Roles of Freedmen, Volume 1.
Now look, let me stop right there. So y'all remember I was talking to this lady and she kept saying, oh, freedmen don't have Indian blood. Freedmen were slaves. And you know, I showed my family records to show the proof to debunk what she said, right? So this is even more proof. Check this out. This is for all the freedmen. I don't care who you are, what nation you from. If your people was listed as freedmen, they were listed as Indians. But look, let me read this. Let me zoom in so y'all can see. We're going to read this shit together. Congress in 1924 conferred national citizenship on all Indians born in the United States. That just happened in 1924. Title 8 USCA 1401 A and 2. Before that time, individual Indians could become citizens in a number of ways. The General Allotment Act, as well as some special allotment statutes, conferred citizenship upon Indians who received allotments. It don't stop. General Allotment Act, Chapter 119, subsection 6 and 24, Stat 388 and 390 in the year 1887. That act also provided citizenship for Indians who took up residence apart from their tribes and adopted the habits of civilized life. So, once again, that act also provided citizenship for Indians who took up residence apart from their tribes and adopted the habits of civilized life. So who are these freedmen again? Fucking Indians. Fucking Indians who took up residence apart from their tribes. But that don't mean that they're not from their tribes. Let's continue to read. While the 1924 statute makes all native-born Indians United States citizens, it is the 14th Amendment that makes them citizens of the states where they reside as well. The status of Indians as citizens of the United States and of the individual states does not interfere with Indian relationship to their tribes or with the trust relationship between the tribes and the federal government. Motherfucker. So that ain't no more. Look, write this shit down, y'all, because ain't no more of them saying freedmen are not Indians. Freedmen don't possess the blood. Freedmen are fucking Indians who got land allotments, who wanted to live away from the tribe, but that does not mean that they're not a part of the tribe anymore. Let's read this again. The status of Indians as citizens of the United States and of the individual states does not interfere with the Indians' relationship to their tribes or with the trust relationship between the tribes and the federal government. Now let's go to the treaty. Let's go to the fucking treaty. This is the Treaty of 1866. So if any one of y'all people are freemen, y'all fucking Indians. And they trying to discriminate against us. The said nations further agree that all Negroes not otherwise disqualified or disabled shall be competent witnesses in all civil and criminal suits and proceedings in the Choctaw and Chickasaw courts. Now, at this time, they was applying Negro to Indians. So a Negro wasn't somebody from Africa. They changed that definition recently. Let's continue to read. Any law to the contrary, notwithstanding. So to make a law that goes against, or to make a code, or to make a law that goes against this is notwithstanding. And they fully recognize the right of the freedmen to a fair remuneration. So Indian workers, I told y'all, this shit about freedmen being slaves and shit like that, freedmen were Indian workers. So if you want to say they were slaves about their money. Slaves who had contracts. On reasonable and equitable contracts, like I just said, for their labor, which the law should aid them to enforce. And they agree on the part of their respective nations that all laws shall be equal in their operation upon Choctaws, Chickasaws, and Negroes, and that no distinction affecting the latter shall at any time be made. Once again, Choctaws, Chickasaws, and Negroes, and that no distinction affecting the latter shall at any time be made, and that they shall be treated with kindness and be protected against injury. And they further agree that while the said freedmen now in the Choctaw and Chickasaw nations, although the freedmen there was already Indians. There was already Indians. Because the General Allotment Act gave Indians land. They were already part of the tribes. And like I said, freedmen were workers. They had I don't know what type of contracts they had, but it's something about an Indian freedman or a freedman, just a freedman period. They don't want us knowing what's really going on.
Okay, it's history of the freedmen were former slaves of tribal members who had lived in both the upper and lower Creek territories in the southeast. Now they use that word slave. Now as Aboriginal Mac of the American Indian Council, he said that they weren't slaves, they were workers who had contracts. Okay, so we know how to dodge that altogether. And then they're saying here, it says Creek citizens married enslaved men and women and had mixed race children. Now, technically, we already know that the so-called Black American Indians or Negroes, that they were your original Indians. They are your Paleo Indians, your mound builders, who are the oldest Indians that's here on this landmass. And if they were mixed, then more than likely they were mixed with the people that came from Siberia, who are not the original Indians. So anyways, but in their narrative, which is incorrect, what they're trying to say is that the so-called Black Indian or freedman is a person that's mixed with African ancestry and so-called Native American ancestry, and trying to make you believe that the Native Americans are the real Indians or the original Indians, which is not the case. So anyways, it says because most Muskogee or Creek Nation allied with the Confederacy Civil Wars Union victory, United States in 1866 required a new treaty with the Creek Nation and other 5 civilized tribes which also had allied with the Confederacy. Then skipping down, it says 1893, the United States Dawes Commission under the direction of Henry L. Dawes was established by an act of Congress. It says the Dawes Act was part of a continuing effort to assimilate American Indians and directed the breakup of communal tribal lands and the allotment of 160-acre plots to individual households. All members of each tribe had to be registered for a land allotment. Beginning in 1898, the U.S. officials created the Dawes rolls to document the tribal members of such allotments. Registers quickly classified as Indians by blood, freedmen, or intermarried whites. However, it included Creek freedmen, citizens in the Creek Nation. Okay. And it says, for instance, many freedmen were of Creek descent were included only on freedmen rolls rather than being noted of Indian by blood. So in other words, it was a lot of fraud that was going on, because you know that whites who intermarried or people who paid $5 to the Dawes Commission were listed as Indians by blood when they in fact had zero ancestry of Indian blood. And then the people who had Indian ancestry and who were full-blooded or almost full-blooded Indian were listed as freedmen. And freedmen were considered as people who did not have Indian blood when they were the real deal Indians. So what they did was basically they traded places. The Africans, your real Africans, which are the Europeans who have ancestry from Eurasia, and a lot of that ancestry comes from Africa, they switched places with the Indians as being listed as Indians by blood, while the real Indians were listed as Africans and not as Indians by blood. Okay, so now we're going to talk about this. What they're giving you the definition of what a freedman was considered as being, even though all of the freedmen are not of African descent or mixed African and American Indian descent. It says here, though none of the aforementioned changes the fact that there were truly members, mostly mixed blood whites having owned slaves in the traditional sense of American understanding, relegated to the Indian country by a litany of earlier treaties and geographical boundaries. It was also insisted upon by Indians and whites that these ethnic natives, at the conclusion of the Civil War in Indian country, be viewed and treated equally as Indian citizens in every way imaginable, which is why they were drafted into the treaty's tribal legislative acts, adopted en masse, and had heirs to the legacy of each tribe. It is only the forces of racism and discrimination opposing them after Civil War. Therefore, during the 1866 treaty negotiations, the Seminoles were reticent to identify African ancestry tribal members as formal slaves or freedmen. The treaty agreement concluded March 21st, 1866, and Article 2 addressed many persons of African descent and blood, their descendants, and such others of the same race as shall be permitted by said nation to settle there, shall have and enjoy all the rights of native citizens, and the laws of said nation shall be equally binding upon all the persons of whatever race of color who may be adopted as citizens of members of the said tribe. The Seminole Treaty, including sweeping stipulations, mandates, guarantees specific to African ancestor members of the tribes, even land cessions to the United States for purposes of settling the freedmen of their own colonies, districts, and towns, addressing in Article 3, in compliance with the desire of the United States to locate other Indians and freedmen thereof. The Seminoles cede and convey the United States their entire domain, being the tract of the land ceded to the Seminole Indians by Creek Nation under the provisions of Article 1, Treaty of the United States with the Creeks and the Seminoles, made and concluded in Washington, D.C., August 7, 1856. The consideration of said grant and cession of their lands estimated at 2,169,080 acres. Then it says here, a 1569 Enabling Act benefiting Moorish settlers and ethnic Seminoles, presented in the form of a cedula, a Spanish royal proclamation, conferred upon Pedro Menendez de Aviles in Florida to form a crown colony. And then it says the entire political constituency was originally acknowledged by Pedro Menendez de Aviles, continued or even down through his nephew Francisco Menendez and African Mendingo. Now pause. See, now that's what I'm saying. So he was underneath the Spanish crown, but he was an African Mendingo. That's what I'm saying. Is that a lot of these white people, they have African ancestry. And way more than we do. Okay, so anyways. So I'm just going to stop there. And this is on, Black Indians United website. And I'm going to have the link below.
Individuals who participated in those negotiations and signed that treaty of 1866. One of those individuals was a Creek of African descent, or African Creek, by the name of Cal Tom, who was my 4-time great-grandfather. He signed that treaty, and in that treaty, you have a copy of it. All our media members and anyone else that wants a copy, we'll give it to you. Article 2 of that treaty simply says, or clearly says, that Creeks of African descent shall have and enjoy all the rights and privileges of native citizens, including an equal interest in the soil and national funds, and the laws of said nation shall be equally binding upon them and give equal protection of all such persons and all others whatsoever of race or color. That is where we are today, because from 1866 into the Dawes Commission of Roads, which first started with the Dawes Act, which was passed in 1893, and then when they 1887, when they created the Dawes Commission in 1893, and then in 1898, the Curtis Act, where they forcibly enrolled Creek citizens. It was the United States government that segregated so-called Creek freedmen. It was the United States government that used the hypo descent rule that said 1 drop of black blood makes you black. It was the United States government that created a separate role of so-called Creeks by blood and so-called Creek freedmen. That was not something that the Creeks did themselves. However, in 1979, the Creek Nation, relying upon this openly racist Dawes Roads, decided to segregate, strip, and steal the heritage, culture, and citizenship of those so-called Creek freedmen and their descendants. And their descendants are here today. I would like for the Black Creek or so-called Creek freedmen descendants to please stand. Please just stand and be recognized. Please stand. These individuals and so many more across this nation grew up speaking Creek, living Creek ways. They understood what it meant to be Creek. And just like my grandmother, Johnny Mae Alston, just had it ripped from them, illegally, ripped from them, and told that they were not who they are. They are Creek people, period, point blank. The treaty says so, but more importantly, our history says so. Our culture says so. Our birthright says so. So in this lawsuit, we will utilize the Treaty of 1866, the clear language, to get the citizenship that has been denied for almost 40 years, illegally denied for almost 40 years. Be inspired by what the Seminole Nation freedmen have been able to do, and the Cherokee freedmen last year in August 30th, 2017, when they won their successful fight in the Cherokee Nation. We believe strongly that we will win our fight here in the Creek Nation. This is a historic day. I'm proud and blessed to stand here with my clients, my family, my people, to stand up the same way so many Creek so-called freedmen stood up. People like Warrior Renty and Judge Reed and Silas Jefferson and Cal Tom and Jake Simmons Jr. And the list goes on and on and on. So we have other individuals here I want to have your opportunity to hear from. The first individual will be Jeff Kennedy, who will tell you a little bit about the organization, an overview, and what they do and the work they've been doing so importantly over the last few years. Jeff.
I don't normally do this, so just kind of bear with me. First, I'd like to thank the law firms of DeMauro, Solomon Simmons, Riggs Abney, Grant Zorn, and is that Beveridge and Diamond for the awesome work that they've done. We were really excited that they sought us out because they recognized the great contributions we have been making to the community, and they felt like we are the best to represent this lawsuit. The MCIFB, of course, is comprised of members that can trace their ancestry back to the Dawes Roll. Of course, my name is Jeff Kennedy. I'm the great-grandson of Ben Grayson, Dawes Roll number 5329. And of course, Ms. Rhonda Grayson is also a co-member, co-founder and a board member. And your ancestor is?
America Cohee, married name Webster, Creek Road number 4661.
Ms. Sherry?
I'm Sharon Lindsay Scott. My ancestor is Jackson Harriman. Roll number is 3665.
And so, as you can see, we can all go back to the Dawes Roll. At one point, they said that we did not have a Dawes Roll, but clearly, you see that's incorrect. So, what I'm basically about to tell you is a little bit of an overview. Our mission statement is, I'll read that, to preserve and protect the unique history and heritage and genealogy of the Muskogee Creek Indian freedmen who were removed to Indian Territory, which is Oklahoma, on the Trail of Tears. Next, to promote interest and participation by sharing genealogical information with members, researchers, and the general public. Next, to provide and help and educate resource to researchers and through lectures, workshops, conferences, and museum exhibits. And lastly, to educate the members and the public of the African Creeks, political rights, and citizens of the Creek Nation defined by the Creek Treaty of 1866, Article 2. Ladies and gentlemen, we had just celebrated our sesquicentennial. That's that sesquicentennial, which is the 150th anniversary of the signing of the Treaty of 1866. This marks our 152nd anniversary. Of course, it was ratified July 19th, so we're excited. We are a 501(c) organization. We're over 850 members strong. And what else did we actually want to say? He said that was good enough. But anyway, we just want to thank our members for showing up. Oh, go ahead. We're done. Sometimes you get a little excited, and I do get a little bit emotional because we're really passionate about what we do. We're really passionate about, like I said, what we do. And we just want everybody to know that basically we're trying to go home. We're just trying to come home. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be David Briggs. But before we bring him, I want to be very clear when we say so-called Creek freedmen. We're not trying to run away from anything, but you have to understand that African Creeks or Black Creeks, they didn't use that terminology. It's not what they called themselves. They called themselves African Creeks, or Black Creeks, or as my great-grandfather will call himself, as my grandmother can attest, a native black. They didn't use the term freedmen. This is a term that was forced upon them by the United States government, and it lumped everyone regardless. This is not about blood, but it lumped everybody into one category regardless of who their real genealogy is. And that's not right. And that's what we're going to continue to fight against as we continue to fight to get citizenship. We want to make sure we can correct the history of who these people are. So David Riggs from our firm, one of our firm founders,